ha, ha. Now I am in a joyous mood. I am jumping for joy because Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley 2 failed miserably at the pay-per-view box office. Actually reported that it did 65,000, but I think someone on Twitter who's like a person in the boxing community, the screenshot will be right there, basically said that, if you add on digital sales, it still would be basically 100K pay-per-view buys if you count the digital sales. To put that into context, this fight did 36,000 less than the TikTok versus YouTube event that was $80. That is embarrassing. That is in L. Jake Paul is not a global pay-per-view star. He's not even a national pay-per-view star. Like, his whole valuable promotions Instagram claimed that his fight with Askren did 1.6. Now, let's say that's true. That would still be an L because he still fell off tremendously. I think that Ben Askren and the two Tyron Woodley fights, the 3 fights he had in 2021, were flops at the pay-per-view box office, and they did not generate the money that was satisfactory at all. And I think that's because people are finally starting to understand that the MMA storyline is not interesting, it's not intriguing, and people have come to expect to see Jake Paul always winning, so they don't care. No, Jake thought, I can do the Floyd Mayweather effect, where people hate me so much that they are going to buy my fights. But the thing is that back when Floyd Mayweather fought, illegal sites and ways of purchasing, of not being able to pay the fight, weren't around then, and now they are. And at the same time, Floyd was such a technician in the ring, and you had to respect his skill, at least. And he got people emotionally invested. Whereas with Jake, it all depends on who he's fighting. Like Ben Askren, the reason why the Ben Askren fight was so successful was because Ben Askren marketed it amazingly. People loved him as a fighter, and they got invested. Tyron Woodley really was not a great marketer, and he didn't sell the fight very well. Tommy Fury was also kind of bland. So really all is very dependable on who Jake Paul fights. Because if we have someone like Ben Askren, his fights are going to be successful. But if you have someone like Tyron Woodley, they're not going to be so successful. Because Jake Paul can call himself a marketing genius, a marketing guru. It just comes off as annoying and childish, and it's nothing revolutionary. Also, at the same time, it's become an old shtick. People from my YouTube community, and I think everyone has felt this after the first Tyron Woodley fight, people kind of there was this whole vibe and energy of we don't care about YouTube boxing anymore, and people weren't really interested in Jake fighting Tommy, and they were, but it was just kind of like, this is kind of the new normal. And that's because YouTube boxing should be a special thing that should come and go, and not something that's consistent, that's always there, because then it's just, Jake's saying this again. He wants to be successful. He needs to make his fights more interesting. With Logan Paul versus Floyd Mayweather, the Jake Paul fights, people are realizing these fights are, got great, get you interested, but then you go and watch them, and they're just clinching and they're boring. For Jake and Logan, they both need to understand because they're actually starting to sell on the level of an Austin McBroom, and that's embarrassing for them. That's really bad for them from a business perspective. If they want to improve their sales, their fights need to be more interesting. They just need to go for it more, and they're not going for it. And it's like, and they need to fight opponents that make sense, that make people interested. Like KSI versus Logan Paul, those fights, the YouTube versus TikTok, people were more interested in that because those fights made sense, or they were two people that were new to boxing, or it was something that you could get interested in from a storyline perspective, but also from a KSI and Logan, it's such a 50-50. Whereas with Jake Paul's fights, it's pretty much been he's gonna win, and then with the Tyron Woodley fight, it was just kind of boring and a very, very poor win from a technical standpoint from Jake Paul. And also, these fights should not be $60, $70. These fights should be the most $40 a piece. I think the only fight that people would be willing to pay the $60, $70 would be KSI versus Jake Paul. And the other thing is that YouTube boxing should have ended back in 2019 with KSI v. Logan Paul 2. None of the fights that have happened have made sense, or they've been mismatches, or they've been cash grabs, or they've been exhibitions, or they've been circuses, and it's just not the same. It's not peak YouTube boxing. The only fight that people want to see from YouTube boxing from Jake and Logan, no one cares about what Logan does anymore. And if anything, I think Logan should go back to creating content. People want to see KSI versus Jake Paul. And once that happens, people are moving on. YouTube boxing is a trend. It's not like this mainstream thing. And I think we've seen with, TikTok, YouTube versus TikTok and the Jake Paul fights, that this thing is not sustainable. And the lessons is that you need to market things better. You need to have, fights that make sense. And you need to make your fights interesting. You know, KSI versus Logan Paul, people knew that they were going to get a technical good fight, but it was exciting, it was interesting, it was fast-paced, drama, knockouts, illegal hits, passion. Like, KSI versus Logan Paul, the 6th round of the last fight was more interesting and more entertaining. People were coming for entertainment. Keyword, entertainment. And we're not getting entertainment. We're getting basically a Floyd Mayweather fight, but if he was technically terrible. Like, why KSI versus Logan Paul in those early fights worked is because there was a storyline and it made sense. Real beef. And if they used their platforms to their advantage to incentivize the fight. Every week a new video came out. Diss tracks, calling each other out for stuff they said, the press conference that built up the hype. They used their platforms to their advantage, and that's been something that's gone away since the Showtime era of YouTube boxing. And that should be brought back because it gets the fans invested. It gives people like me stuff to talk about. Like when Logan put out a video boxing the Gronks, Wade Concept posted a video on it. It made interest go up for the Floyd fight. Created conversations every week, and they need to bring that back because at the end of the day, these marketing companies don't get how these social media events work, and the ones that do are the content creators. KSI is more of a global pay-per-view star than Jake Paul is because he sold 1.3 million for his first fight, sold out Manchester Arena, almost sold out Staples Center, and did probably 1.45 for his second fight. So he's made more money. Probably, I don't know if he's made more money, but KSI has basically taken a W inadvertently, and you'll love to see it. And that's really all I gotta say.